What happens when an ordinary tired evening at a small countryside farm with mushroom soup on the stove, 3 loyal dogs waiting at the door, and a lotus pond just beginning to bloom, slowly becomes the moment one young couple decides to widen their home for someone who once gave them everything? In today's gentle countryside story, Tu Tien returns from a long market day selling plums while Jack arrives home early from the city office to cook for her. Through soft conversations over rice and tofu soup, the careful feeding of Vong Miu and Ki, a quiet phone call to Mother Loy in the village, and one tender talk by the lotus pond at sunset, the two of them quietly arrive at a decision that has been waiting in their hearts for weeks. What begins as an ordinary tired evening soon becomes the kind of warm countryside night that reminds them why simple things, shared together, are worth more than anything money could ever buy. The late afternoon sun stretched gently across the dusty corner of the village market. As Tu Tien finished selling the last kilogram of the plums she had carried out at dawn, the wide bamboo hat she wore had slipped slightly back, her cheeks lightly pink from the warm air, and her cloth basket nearly empty. Around her stood the simple stalls of other countryside women, the soft sounds of bicycles passing on the dirt road, the gentle chatter of customers leaning over baskets of fresh vegetables, the distant calls of vendors selling the last of the morning catch. Her plums had sold quickly that afternoon. 15,000 dong per kilogram, picked that morning from her own quiet garden. The kind of plums neighbors stopped to buy not just because they were fresh, but because they had been picked by a hand they trusted. They were not wealthy people, and they had never dreamed of being wealthy people. The small farm Jack and Tu Tien had built together over 2 long seasons was simple and theirs: a wooden home filled with morning light, a small lotus pond at the edge of the garden, 3 loyal dogs, a calm-spotted cat, and a kitchen that smelled gently of dried herbs and warm rice every single evening. Tu Tien had learned in the quiet years beside Jack that the most beautiful things in life were rarely the ones that arrived in a hurry. She gently folded the empty cloth she had used to display her plums and reached into her pocket as her phone began to ring. Jack's name appeared softly on the small screen. "Anne," she said warmly, "I'm on my way home now." "Tu Tien," Jack replied gently, "I finished work early today. I'm already cooking dinner. Take your time on the road, Em." She smiled the kind of soft, tired smile that only countryside women know. The smile that comes after a long, warm day of harvesting and selling and walking home with a heart that feels strangely lighter than her tired feet. From that day on, the soft countryside evening seemed to settle slowly around her, like a familiar blanket. By the time she reached the wooden gate of the farmhouse, the late afternoon golden light was already drifting peacefully across the lotus pond beside the garden. The cicadas in the old mango tree had begun their slow evening song. From inside the warm kitchen came the gentle scent of salted chicken from the village supermarket, and the clean, soft smell of tofu and mushroom soup quietly simmering on the small clay stove. Jack was standing in the kitchen when she stepped inside, an apron tied loosely around his waist, his face calm and gently focused on the soup. He looked up the moment he heard her footsteps and smiled the quiet, warm smile he only ever gave her. "You're home, Em," he said softly. "Go change your clothes and come eat. I finished cooking already." "You came home from work and you still cooked for me," she said quietly. "Thank you, Anne." "Tu Tien was at the market all day," he replied gently. "You should rest." Today, the heat was strong. She washed her hands at the small outdoor sink, changed into a soft cotton shirt, and returned to the warm kitchen where Jack had already arranged the small wooden table with steaming bowls of rice, a plate of soft salted chicken, and a small clay pot of tofu and mushroom soup. The setting sun outside the open window cast a peaceful golden glow across every corner of the room. She sat down quietly across from him and picked up her chopsticks. "What kind of soup is this, Anne?" she asked, her voice soft. "Tofu and mushroom soup?" Jack answered gently. "In summer it cools the body, Tu Tien." She tasted the soup carefully. Her eyes softened slowly. "Anne, this tofu is strange. It's so smooth and there's even a quiet taste of egg in it. They make it a different way." He said quietly. "I bought it at the supermarket on the way home." She smiled. The salted chicken was warm and soft. The mushroom soup was clean and gentle on her tongue. The rice was just slightly hot from the small cooker. For a few quiet minutes, the two of them ate together without speaking, the way two people eat together when they have been eating together for years and no longer need words to feel close. Outside the open window, the sky was slowly turning a soft pink. The wind moved gently through the lotus leaves on the pond, while somewhere down the dirt road, a neighbor's child was calling another child home for dinner. A short way into the meal, Tu Tien quietly mentioned the small story of her afternoon. The plums had sold quickly. She had bought them in the morning for 8,000 a kilogram, and the kind women at the market had bought them from her for 15,000. Jack smiled gently and told her she should eat more, that she had worked hard, that the chicken was meant for her. Halfway through dinner, the small spotted cat Mew wandered in from the porch and brushed quietly against Tu Tien's ankle. She tore a small piece of the salted chicken and placed it on the corner of the floor for him. Jack smiled. "We have to bathe Key tomorrow, he said quietly. "He's been gone all day and just came back covered in dust." "We should take him down to the stream, she replied softly. After the meal, Jack carried the empty bowls to the small sink, while Tu Tien gently prepared a bowl of mixed rice for the dogs. The mother dog Vang had recently given birth, and Tu Tien had been quietly making sure she ate enough every day to feed her puppies. She walked out to the small wooden shed beside the kitchen and gently set the bowl down near Vang's resting place. The dog looked up at her with calm, warm eyes before slowly beginning to eat. Key, the smaller mischievous one, came running from somewhere behind the lotus pond, his fur slightly damp from the stream. "Key, come here and eat, my dear," Tu Tien called softly. "Tomorrow, Tu Tien will give you a bath." She returned to the kitchen to find that Jack had already washed every dish. She gently shook her head, smiling. "Go take a shower and cool off she said quietly. "I'll finish cleaning up. I'm already done." He replied warmly. "Just go out to the veranda. I'll shower and then we'll eat some fruit together." She walked slowly out onto the wooden veranda. The sun was beginning to set softly across the wide rice fields beyond the gate. She sat down quietly on the small wooden bench beside the lotus pond and looked out across the still water. The pale pink lotus flowers floated peacefully on the surface. Beside them, the smaller water lily she had planted weeks ago was just beginning to show its first quiet bud. "Anne," she called gently, "the water lily has a bud now." "Yes, I saw it, Tu Tien," Jack answered from inside. "1 or 2 more days and it will bloom." She smiled softly to herself. Some dreams are not built quickly. They are quietly watered, season after season, until one day they simply bloom without warning. When Jack returned to the veranda, freshly washed and wearing a clean cotton shirt, he sat down beside her on the small wooden bench. Tu Tien had already cut a small plate of fresh apples she had bought at the market on the way home. The golden evening light caught softly on the side of his face. "Eat, Anne," she said gently. He took a small piece. The apple was crisp and sweet. The two of them sat quietly for a moment, the lotus pond glowing softly in front of them, the cicadas singing their slow evening song in the old mango tree. Then, Jack's phone rang gently. It was a soft call from his office in the city, a quiet voice asking him to review a small report. He answered politely, listened carefully, and promised to send a message later that evening. When he ended the call, he set the phone down and quietly opened his laptop on the small wooden table. Tu Tien did not interrupt him. She simply sat beside him, gently leaning against his shoulder, watching him work. "You're working again, Anne," she said softly. "Just a small thing, Em," he replied gently. "It will only take a few minutes." "Then I'll sit here with you," she said quietly. "I don't understand any of the work on your screen, but I like sitting beside you while you work." He smiled warmly and rested his hand briefly on hers. The countryside breeze moved softly through the lotus leaves. The small puppies near the shed had begun to settle for the evening. The first pale stars were beginning to appear above the wide rice fields beyond the gate. After a few quiet minutes, Tu Tien gently remembered something. "Anne, we should call Mom. I haven't called her all day." Jack closed the laptop softly and dialed the number. Mother Loy's calm, warm voice answered after a few rings, and the three of them spoke quietly together for several minutes, about the salted chicken, about the tofu and mushroom soup, about Tu Tien selling plums at the market, about the lotus flowers that had finally begun to bloom by the pond. Mother Loy laughed gently at the small stories of the day. She told them she would be coming home in a few more days, and she reminded them both, the way only mothers remind their children, to take care of their health. Tu Tien rested her head gently against Jack's shoulder as he held the phone, listening to the soft countryside voice of the woman who had quietly raised the man she loved. When the call ended, Tu Tien sat quietly for a moment, looking out across the lotus pond. Then she spoke softly. "Anne, I have been thinking about Uncle Phuong." Jack nodded gently. He had been thinking about him too. He told her quietly that on the way home that afternoon, he had run into Uncle Phuong on the village road. The old man had said he was coming down from a friend's house, but Jack had seen the worn backpack of clothes on his shoulder and had noticed he was walking down from the direction of the abandoned house at the edge of the village. The memory had been sitting on his chest for hours. Tu Tien lowered her eyes. Her chest grew slowly warm, with something that was half love and half quiet pain. She thought of the old man walking alone along the dusty village road with a backpack on his shoulder, of the worn rented house at the edge of the village, of the quiet way certain old men choose to disappear from the lives of the people who love them rather than become a burden. She did not let her tears fall. She simply tightened her hand around Jack's. "Anne," she whispered softly, "tomorrow we have to find Uncle. We have to bring him home." "Yes, Tu Tien," Jack replied gently. "Tomorrow we bring Uncle home. I have his phone number. I'll cook a good meal," she said softly. "I'll cook everything Uncle likes. We will invite him and we will not let him leave." Jack squeezed her hand. He did not say anything for a long moment. The cicadas in the mango tree were now soft. The pale stars above the rice fields were growing brighter. The lotus pond reflected the last gold of the countryside evening in its still water. But deep in her heart, Tu Tien understood that this small, ordinary evening represented far more than a simple shared dinner. Every quiet bowl of soup, every shared piece of fruit, every soft phone call to a mother far away, every gentle decision they had just made carried the weight of a love that had grown slowly through hardship, patience, and sacrifice. Every flower beginning to bloom on the lotus pond reminded her of the days when she and Jack had built this farm together with their own tired hands, never imagining that one day it would become a home large enough to welcome an old man who had once given them everything. The cicadas slowly grew softer in the trees. The first cool breeze of the evening moved gently across the veranda. Tu Tien rested her head against Jack's shoulder. He held her hand quietly in the soft, fading light. Somewhere in the kitchen, the mother dog Vang lay peacefully beside her sleeping puppies. The cat Miu had curled up beside Tu Tien's feet on the warm wooden floor. He sat quietly nearby, his tail moving slowly with the contentment of a small dog who knew he was home. Tomorrow they would prepare the spare bedroom. Tomorrow they would bring Uncle Phuong out of the abandoned house at the edge of the village. Tomorrow the farm would have one more chair at the kitchen table. But tonight, beside the quiet lotus pond, beneath the slow countryside breeze, in the warm shared silence of a simple wooden farmhouse, the two of them already knew, without saying it out loud, that family was no longer something they were searching for. It was already here, quietly, softly, completely. And it had been here all along.